If you could only put one thing in a bowl before bed to protect your kidneys overnight, most doctors couldn't actually answer that question with confidence. I can, and after 2 decades of watching patients try to remember lists of 8, 10, sometimes 12 kidney-friendly fruits only to give up and eat nothing at all, I stopped handing out long lists entirely. I built one specific bowl instead, 3 fruits, each one doing something the other 2 can't. And tonight I'm giving you the exact combination along with the reasoning behind every single ingredient in it. Stay with me because past the halfway mark, I'll walk you through one fruit that almost made this bowl and the specific reason I left it out. Something worth knowing even if you never plan to eat it. Let's get into it. A quick note before we begin. This video shares general nutritional information. It's not medical advice, and it doesn't replace guidance from your own doctor or kidney dietitian, especially if you're managing an existing kidney condition. I want to start with why patients kept asking me this question in the first place. Your kidneys are 2 fist-sized organs sitting just below your rib cage, and together they filter roughly 200 liters of blood every single day, somewhere around 50 gallons, removing waste, excess fluid, and toxins before returning clean. Balance blood back into circulation. That workload doesn't pause while you sleep, and if anything, some of the most important regulatory work, particularly around blood pressure, happens specifically overnight. Potassium is genuinely essential for normal nerve, muscle, and heart function, but when kidney function has declined, damaged kidneys may struggle to clear excess potassium efficiently, and levels can climb high enough to become dangerous. That's the exact tension patients are navigating every time they stand in front of their own refrigerator at 9 at night, wondering whether reaching for fruit is helping them or working against them. The bowl I'm about to walk you through exists specifically to remove that guesswork. The first fruit, and the one I consider genuinely non-negotiable in this particular bowl, is tart cherries. Here's the reasoning, in full. Blood pressure is supposed to drop naturally during sleep, a well-documented pattern called nocturnal dipping, and that nightly dip matters because it gives the small vessels inside your kidneys genuine recovery time from daytime pressure. When sleep is fragmented or poor, that dip often doesn't happen properly, and the kidneys end up absorbing hours of sustained higher pressure they weren't built to filter through continuously, night after night. Tart cherries contain phytomelatonin, a plant-based compound related to the hormone your body naturally produces to regulate sleep, alongside tryptophan and a set of phytochemicals that research has linked to measurable improvements in sleep quality. A pilot study specifically looking at older adults with insomnia found tart cherry juice produced meaningful reductions in insomnia severity compared to placebo, with effects comparable to some commonly used natural sleep interventions. Sour tart cherries specifically carry very little potassium, sodium, or phosphorus, appropriate at nearly every stage of kidney disease. In the bowl, this means half a cup of tart cherries, or 4 ounces of unsweetened tart cherry juice if fresh isn't practical. The sour or Montmorency variety specifically, never sweet cherries, which carry meaningfully more potassium and belong in a different conversation entirely. The second fruit is blueberries, and I chose it deliberately for what it does differently from the cherries, not simply because it's another antioxidant-rich option. Blueberries are rich in anthocyanins, a distinct family of anti-inflammatory plant pigments, and chronic inflammation is one of the central mechanisms driving kidney disease forward over time. Here's the detail that made blueberries the obvious second choice rather than an interchangeable alternative. Cardiovascular disease and kidney disease share the same underlying inflammatory pathway and very frequently progress together in the same patient, which means supporting that pathway protects both systems at once. A half cup of blueberries carries less than 150 milligrams of potassium, low enough to remain appropriate across every stage of kidney disease, including dialysis. In the bowl, a small handful, roughly a third of a cup, fresh, frozen, or freeze-dried, whichever happens to be sitting in your kitchen that night. The third fruit completing the bowl is strawberries. If tart cherries are working on sleep and nocturnal blood pressure, and blueberries are working on broad inflammation, strawberries are addressing something more specific still: direct oxidative stress. Research has linked strawberry consumption to measurable increases in the body's own antioxidant capacity, specifically glutathione levels. And oxidative stress is understood to be one of the primary drivers of chronic kidney disease progression, largely independent of inflammation alone. Strawberries also carry one of the lowest potassium counts of any fruit, roughly 130 milligrams per half cup, safe even for patients managing more advanced kidney disease on strict potassium limits, including hemodialysis and peritoneal dialysis. In the bowl, 3 to 4 fresh strawberries, sliced, rinsed just before eating. If this is giving you something worth trying tonight, tap that like button. It genuinely helps this reach someone else quietly standing in front of their own refrigerator, unsure what to reach for. Now here's the fruit I promised you, the one that almost made this bowl and ultimately didn't. Cranberries. There's genuine research behind cranberries and urinary tract health specifically. Compounds called proanthocyanidins that appear to make it harder for certain bacteria to cling to the bladder wall, linked to a modest reduction in recurrent urinary tract infections in some populations. That part is real, and it's exactly why cranberries come up constantly in conversations about kidney and urinary health. Here's what almost never gets mentioned alongside it. Cranberry products do not treat an active infection. That's always a conversation for your doctor. Never something a bowl of fruit can substitute for. And here's the specific catch that kept cranberries out of tonight's bowl entirely. Raw cranberries are extremely tart. Essentially, nobody eats them plain, which means nearly every cranberry product marketed for health, juice cocktails, sweetened dried cranberries, flavored supplements, carries a meaningful amount of added sugar to make it palatable. Sugar-sweetened products are independently linked to increased kidney disease risk, meaning a cranberry juice cocktail marketed specifically as good for your kidneys can simultaneously be working against them through the sugar alone. Finding and consistently using the genuinely unsweetened version, night after night, turns out to be considerably harder to sustain in practice than simply building the bowl around the 3 fruits that don't require that extra vigilance. If you do want the urinary benefit cranberries offer, keep it as a separate, deliberate choice: unsweetened juice or raw, unsweetened dried cranberries in small portions, rather than folding it into a nightly routine. One more caution worth knowing: there's some evidence of a possible interaction between cranberry and the blood thinner warfarin, so mention regular use to your pharmacist if that applies to you. Here's the complete bowl, assembled. Half a cup of tart cherries, a small handful of blueberries, roughly a third of a cup, and 3 to 4 sliced strawberries, combined in one bowl and eaten 30 to 60 minutes before bed. If fresh tart cherries aren't available, 4 ounces of unsweetened tart cherry juice poured over the berries works just as well. I want to explain briefly why 3 specific fruits outperform simply eating more of any single one. Each ingredient here is doing genuinely distinct work. Tart cherries on sleep and blood pressure, blueberries on broad inflammation, strawberries on direct oxidative stress. A large bowl of blueberries alone gives you real anti-inflammatory support, but leaves the sleep pathway and the oxidative stress pathway essentially untouched. Combining smaller amounts of all 3 means addressing 3 separate physiological processes in one sitting, which is precisely why this became my answer to that recurring question, rather than simply naming whichever single fruit had the most research behind it that particular week. There's also a practical reason this specific structure tends to actually stick rather than becoming another good intention abandoned within a few weeks. A fixed 3-ingredient bowl removes the nightly decision entirely. Patients aren't standing in the kitchen weighing 8 or 10 options against each other at the end of a long day. They're simply making the same bowl, the way a habit works rather than a choice made fresh every single time. In my experience, The patients who actually stick with something long enough to see real benefit are almost always the ones with one simple, repeatable routine, not the ones handed the longest, most comprehensive list. Important note before we close: this bowl and every fruit in it is genuinely low in potassium in general terms, but general terms aren't the same as your specific numbers. If you're managing more advanced kidney disease, stage 4 or 5 specifically, your individual limits may be tight enough that even this bowl needs to be counted carefully within a daily allowance set by your kidney dietitian. The National Kidney Foundation notes that earlier stages of kidney disease usually don't require strict potassium limits unless blood levels are already elevated, but that changes in later stages. Regardless of how low potassium a given food generally is, if you haven't had a basic kidney function test recently and you're over 60, it's worth asking for one at your next appointment. A simple panel checking creatinine, filtration rate, and electrolytes gives you a real current picture of where your kidneys actually stand, rather than a guess based on how you feel day to day. I think of a patient I'll call Diane, 69, managing early-stage chronic kidney disease alongside restless, fragmented sleep that had bothered her for years before we ever connected the two. She wasn't avoiding fruit, she simply wasn't eating much of anything specific before bed, defaulting to nothing rather than making an intentional choice most nights. When she started making this exact bowl consistently, the change wasn't dramatic or immediate, but within about a month she described her sleep as noticeably steadier and meant almost as an aside that she'd stopped needing her usual over-the-counter sleep aid most nights. I want to be honest that this isn't a guaranteed outcome for every patient. Sleep and kidney health both involve many contributing factors, but the consistency of one simple, repeatable bowl made an actual measurable difference for her, in a way that a long list of options never quite had. One bowl, 3 fruits, each one answering a different part of the same question I've been asked more times than I can count. If this gave you something worth trying tonight, tap that like button and subscribe, because tomorrow we're back with another piece of evidence-based wisdom mainstream health content rarely takes the time to explain properly.